Welcome to MACC Talk, a Middle Tennessee podcast from Mont Haven Arts and Cultural Center in Hendersonville, Tennessee. I'm Celeste Davidson, the Development Director here at the MACC. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Business Credit Reports in Hendersonville. Since 1989, over 36,000 customers have relied on Business Credit Reports as their small business information specialists.
Thank you, Celeste, and welcome everyone to MACC Talk. I'm your host, John Pitcher. We like to think of the MACC as a cultural town square where we encourage everyone to be their creative best. So, Celeste, what sort of creative things have you been doing this week?
Well, John, you know we are in Middle Tennessee, and so many of us have day jobs, and then we have a little creative thing we do on the side. One of my creative things is music. My husband and I are both musicians, and we are actively getting back into the swing of things, working on a new project of sorts, and it's been a ball, and I'm super excited.
Okay, well, that begs the question, what's your new project?
Well, we're doing a little husband-wife duo. He plays bass, Daddy plays bass, and Mama plays guitar, but we're doing some more folky stuff, some more rootsy stuff. We're just playing around, and we're trying to incorporate the kids. So it is definitely the beginning stages, but we're having a lot of fun with it, spending time together and getting back to our musical roots. So it's been great. And working here is always fostering the creative in me, as you know, John. Yeah,
no, you're also a singer, right?
Yes, sir. I do the singing. I guess I left that off. I'm much better at singing than playing the guitar, although I'm getting back at it after some medical issues. It has been difficult, but I'm enjoying trying to get my voice back in many ways. So yeah, it's been great.
Celeste, you're definitely one of the most versatile people that we have here at Mont Haven, which is why we have you doing everything. And so I'm pleased to announce that you're going to be our lead act for Sweet Summer Concerts coming up in the summer.
I think we're pushing it, but okay.
Okay, all right. Maybe not this summer. Maybe next summer. Okay. Well, you know what? Speaking of discovering old talents and new talents, let's go ahead and introduce today's guest. He's Scott Williams, the president and CEO of Discovery Park of America. Located in Union City, Tennessee, the aptly named Discovery Park is one of the volunteer state's great museums. It's a place where visitors can explore the wonders of natural history, regional history, science and technology, and much more. Scott Williams is the perfect person to lead this institution. He's the author of 3 books, including one about West Tennessee's legendary Davy Crockett. He also served as the past president of the museum in Washington, D.C., and he worked for over 12 years at Elvis Presley Enterprises, where he helped manage Graceland. Scott Williams, welcome to MACC Talk.
Thank you. It's fantastic to be here.
Wow. Well, there's a lot I want to talk about today, but let's just get started with Discovery Park. What do visitors get to discover when they go there?
Yeah, you know, the best way to approach Discovery Park is if you know the history, a little bit of how it came to be. As folks drive to Northwest Tennessee, about 2 hours plus from Nashville, a couple hours from Memphis. You know, we're accessible from Louisville and St. Louis, and so Little Rock. So we draw a lot of people in. But as people come in, the first thing they do when they come around the corner is see this gigantic, gleaming white facility that looks like it absolutely does not belong in the cornfield that it is sitting in. And so are you familiar with the history of Discovery Park?
A little bit, but our listeners probably are not. So go ahead and tell us.
Well, then buckle up.
Okay.
So if you turn the clock back about 15 years, Robert Kirkland and his wife Jenny were a couple of business folks that lived in Union City, Tennessee. Robert Kirkland and his cousin had formed a business many years earlier called Kirkland's, and a lot of people shop at Kirkland's. It's sort of something akin to a Pier 1 Imports, and Robert Kirkland had traveled all over the world learning what kind of products regular folks would want to buy. And so he would find something in Singapore or in Italy or in Malaysia, and he would buy it and replicate it, and they would sell it in the stores. And so he got to travel a lot, and he really felt like traveling opened his mind and opened his eyes to things and ideas and opportunities that he didn't know about, and he knew that he wouldn't be exposed to that if he had stayed in Union City for his entire life. So he did things like send the senior classes of the high schools to Europe, or fund pre-K for kids who were underserved. But he got to a point where he thought, what can I do to make a huge difference in the lives of the people that I'm around every day? And so around that same time, the Goodyear tire plant shut down, taking with it 2,000 jobs out of a town of 10,000. So as you can imagine, it was like a bomb went off. And so Robert Kirkland thought, what can I do to put all these things I want to do together and use the money that I've been blessed with to make a difference? So he put an ad in the paper that said, I'm going to build a center of education in Northwest Tennessee. If you want to join me, meet me at the library on this date at this time, and we'll do it together. And so if you've ever had to put together any kind of meeting or any kind of event, you're always a little curious, is anybody going to show up? And so I'm sure he was holding his breath a little bit. He knew he was going to build it no matter what, but it would be nice to have some help. And so that night, the car started pulling into the library parking lot. Before it was over, 250 members of the community of a town of 10,000, that's a pretty high percentage, showed up to say, we want in. And so he had divided the room into tables, and at each table he had a different topic. So he had science, technology, he had transportation, he had space, and he said, go to the table you're the most interested in that area.
So there was community buy-in.
Absolutely.
Which you have to have.
Absolutely. He went first to get the feedback from members who would be using and accessing and taking advantage of what he was going to build. And so they did, and they came back to him with all the information that they had gathered themselves and said, this is what we think should be in our category in a museum or in a center of education. And so he took all of that to the museum professionals, and by the time he was done, he invested $100 million of his own money in this magnificent space on manicured grounds. So basically, it is a facility unlike anything else in the United States or in the world, really. It's the building itself is a state-of-the-art Smithsonian Institution style exhibit space with 14 galleries that cover in a significant way things like transportation, things like space. And so it is a phenomenal way to experience all of the world in one little tiny space, whether you're 3 years old, 30 years old, or 90 years old. We want you to experience something that's going to change your life. And it's been 11 years since Discovery Park opened, and we now get all kinds of notes and emails and see people in person who say, Discovery Park of America changed my life. I was doing this, I decided to do this. A lot of people come to Discovery Park, and it's their very first time to see an escalator or an elevator. And so our escalators and elevators are in glass, so they can actually see how they work. Hopefully, our goal is to trigger the minds of the next architects, designers, and people who are going to be working in those fields. So anyway, that is a very long answer to your question, but hopefully that gives you
a
good...
It really kind of sets up my next questions very well.
Good.
Because, I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. You mentioned the Smithsonian. Mm-hmm. And when I first started studying Discovery Park, I immediately started thinking about the Smithsonian. I started thinking, it's like they have a natural history museum, American history museum, a science and Technology Museum, all that are surrounded going up and down the National Mall in D.C., you sort of folded them into one building, on this 50-acre tract of land in West Tennessee.
Yep.
And so was that any kind of an inspiration for you?
What's interesting is that Robert Kirkland, he didn't really like the word museum,
right,
because for him that connotated a stuffy,
something
boring,
old and dusty.
You couldn't, and he wanted the opposite of that. He wanted the same outcome,
right,
but he wanted a different process. And so most everything, not everything, but most everything in at Discovery Park is touchable. He wanted interactivity. He wanted people to be able to touch things and feel things. And we have signs that say, "Please step on our grass." He wanted it to be very interactive. He wanted lots of fun. He was a big practical joker, and he was very much about fun and entertainment. So we have a lot of music, we have a lot of art, we have a lot of ways to inspire children and adults to see beyond, which is our mission and our tagline that we use, but it's also our mission. It's also what we live out every day. But he was very funny. One of my favorite practical jokes let me also say, I did not know him. He passed away before I came along, but I get a lot of stories, so I could almost write a biography at this point. But one of my favorite jokes he did was he put an ad in the paper. It looked like it was an editorial. It looked like it was copy. It looked like it was something that the newspaper had written, but he actually had written it. And it said that the engineers of Tennessee and other organizations were working together to bring Reelfoot Lake closer to Union City for tourism. And so some people believed it and they went crazy, and but it was really an April Fool's Day joke. If you looked at the headline, it was April 1st of that year. So he was just playing a joke. So he did a lot of things like that. He very much enjoyed life. And he just wanted to make sure that everybody had that ability and that access to be able to enjoy life like he did.
Okay. Well, speaking of all of these exhibits that you have there are a number of them, many of them, I believe, are permanent, 9 or 10 of the exhibits. What's the most popular one? I can imagine the kids like the dinosaur exhibit.
Yeah, little kids love the dinosaur exhibit, but they also love the giant man slide, where you can slide down 3 stories through a man's leg.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, that's very popular. It also depends a little bit on what a person's what they are inclined to enjoy. Everybody's different. I personally like history, and so we have a village of cabins that were taken apart in little communities around Union City and brought in and put back together again as what a little village would look like. It's a very fun way to experience history. I especially love early Tennessee history and frontier culture, and so we celebrate that and have a lot of education about that, and have a lot of days where we have craftspeople will come in, quilters and people working at the forge, and we have a grist mill. So it's really that's really fun. But a lot of people love transportation. There's a lot of folks that love the natural history. We have an earthquake simulator where you can go in and see what the earthquake was like that created or that contributed to the creation of Reelfoot Lake in 1811 and 1812. So it's really a fun way to both learn about something but also experience it firsthand. And as far as I know, we're the only earthquake simulator in the entire world.
Okay, so the National Geological Survey needs to visit you guys at some
They
point.
have, yeah, absolutely they have. Yeah, they've actually had a conference
Okay,
at
well,
Discovery
that is
Park.
so cool. Well, you mentioned, I have to ask you a little bit about Reelfoot Lake, because that's, a lot of people who maybe don't know Discovery Park yet, a lot of them who are at least outdoor people, they know that lake.
Sure, yeah. Reelfoot Lake.
So that has to be an important feature of that part of Tennessee.
It has a great history. Obviously, not going back any earlier than 1811 and 1812, which is when it was formed. But the ground was already very low-lying, and so it was very wet. a lot of cypress trees, a lot of old forest trees, and a series of earthquakes started happening. No one actually lived around Reelfoot Lake, so it's not like, anybody's house at that point, crumbled into the ground.
So we won't know it as Vesuvius or anything like that.
Yes, exactly. But, like up around Missouri, and there were some areas that were feeling the shocks and the earthquakes. The big ones, it grew progressively bigger. The bigger ones made the church bells ring in Philadelphia, so they say. It appeared in the paper, so it must be true at that time. And then finally the big one happened, and it opened the ground up enough so that the Mississippi River flooded in to fill it up. It felt as though some boats were going backwards, and so you see some of that in some of the accounts. The accounts of that. But anyway, by the time it was all over with, there was a beautiful lake that today is filled with all types of birds. We are in the Mississippi Flyway, and so we get all kinds of birds passing through. It's a great duck hunting area, a great fishing area. It's not, however, the kind of lake that one can go water skiing on. Because of all the cypress stumps that are still there from back then. So only certain kind of boats, can go across there. But, just because of all the game and eagles, there's with other birds come the eagles. And so, you can go out there and they have a report that tells you how many eagles are nesting, so it's in the, in the hundreds. So, you can almost be,
that's extraordinary.
You can almost be certain you'll get to see an eagle if you go out there. I ride my bike out there a lot and, look for the eagles. It's a great place to go with a kayak or a canoe. So just a really fascinating, very authentic area. It's very much today like it was 50, 60, 100 years ago.
Wow. We're speaking with Scott Williams, president of Discovery Park of America. We'll be back after this important message.
Business Credit Report in Gallatin reminds us that art lessons can introduce students to problem-solving techniques that can help them see the world in new ways. Mount Haven Arts and Cultural Center offers multiple art classes for students pre-K through 12th grade, along with adult classes. Register today at monthavenarts.org. This message is a courtesy of Business Credit Report in Gallatin. Visit them at businesscreditreports.com for more information.
We're back with author and Discovery Park of America president Scott Williams. Well, I have to ask you, what's the most unusual exhibit or artifact you have at the museum? I'm going to vote for Professor Ernst Blumberg's vampire killing kit.
That's exactly what my answer was going to be.
Okay.
Yes, that is.
Just thought, how cool is that?
Yeah, that's one of the most unusual. But what's funny about Discovery Park is Robert Kirkland just really filled it with everything, and so as you walk around, I to this day, 6 years after starting to work there, I still see things and I'll think, did we just add that? But no, it's so much that, every time you go, you see 10, 15, 20 things you haven't seen before.
Well, a place is as big as an aircraft carrier, so you're probably discovering a new place every week.
It's absolutely huge. Now, I personally am partial to David Crockett. Okay. And so, we have some David Crockett memorabilia, and we have a David Crockett statue, and we have a David Crockett exhibit. We have a painting of David Crockett, and we tell his story in a variety of ways there because he was the congressman who lived up there and represented West Tennessee. And so having people be aware of him and what his contribution was is really important. So I love that. We are a huge agriculture area, and so we tell that story. A few years ago, the Soybean Foundation didn't feel like we were telling the story good enough, so they worked with us to explore how should we tell the story of agriculture today, and we chose to tell the story through the lens of innovation. And so we have a whole exhibit, huge exhibit on innovation in agriculture, and it's one that everybody will learn something, no matter if you maybe have been a farmer your whole life, but when you come and explore that, you'll learn something new. And so we have little fields where we grow cotton, we grow corn, we have a brand new greenhouse, we have 2 brand new greenhouses. So the outdoors is really just as fascinating as the indoors is at Discovery Park.
Oh, yeah. Well, maybe to go a little bit more in the past here. I'm a former newspaper man, and so I was excited to see that you once headed up the museum in Washington, D.C. What inspired you to move from that to West Tennessee and farm country? What prompted you to do that? That sounds like a risk.
I am hardcore Tennessean, first of all. I grew up in Memphis. My ancestors moved here from Berkeley County, North Carolina, and settled in Haywood County, Tennessee. And so from 1836 until my mom and dad left to go to college, nobody left. So they were Haywood County over, great-grandparents, all the way back to fifth great-grandparents, Haywood County, Tennessee, and then my mom and dad moved to Memphis. So hardcore Tennessean. I worked at Graceland for 12 years, so I worked for Elvis Presley Enterprises, and then we did an exhibit at the museum on Elvis and free expression. And so that's what introduced me to the museum and the mission that they were doing there. And just I fell in love with the people and with the place. And of course, loving history and ancestry. It was a great opportunity to get to the center of all that. Instead of having to call the National Archives and wait on the phone and look on, I was able to walk across the street and go explore the archives.
Okay, well, you should feel very comfortable in this house, because this house today, of course, is sitting in the what is famously known as the residence of Johnny Cash. We're in the same city of Hendersonville, but during the Revolutionary War, this was North Carolina.
Yeah, that's crazy.
This was Davidson County, North Carolina, and a lot of the very first settlers who came in following Demumbrium were North Carolinians.
It was a very long state.
Yeah.
And
it's still a long state, but it was North Carolina was longer then. Yeah.
Would have taken, and they didn't have cars like we do. So
I know.
Would have taken a long time to get from one side of the state to the other.
I think they came up the Cumberland. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of that was the way to travel back in those days.
So I worked at the museum for 7 years, but quite frankly, I never got over being homesick for Tennessee. My core group of friends were still here. My family was here. I am very close to my extended family, and so in conversations with how I could help with the Kirklands, I knew of Discovery Park. I had a friend, Mary Nita Bondurant, who worked there, and she and I were friends on Facebook still. We had worked together years earlier, and so I offered to help because I love museums, I love Tennessee, and I loved their mission. And so one thing led to another, and my wife and I ended up packing up and heading back to Tennessee to live. And it was a different direction than I thought I was going to head with my life and my career. I am a city boy. I am, more used to concrete and malls and office buildings, and that's restaurants, and that's kind of where I had been for my whole life. And so this was my first time to actually live in the country. So we didn't know if we were going to like it or not, but as it turned out, we absolutely love it. We have 5 acres and a house, and
wow,
and that we built, and I have a Kubota that I mow that 5 acres with, and she's teaching. She teaches art history at UT Martin, which is really rewarding for her, and she loves pouring into those young people and teaching them about these young folks that come in from small Tennessee towns. A lot of them don't necessarily know what art is, and so she gets to give them a really good taste of what art is really all about. So that's what took us from Washington, D.C. back to Northwest Tennessee.
Okay. You have a wonderful podcast called Real Foot Forward, and I'm wondering, what was the inspiration? I encourage everyone to listen to it. What was the inspiration for that? What are you trying to accomplish? What is your mission there?
Thank you. So, obviously we're in a rural community, and so we have a lot of fascinating, interesting people that are doing really interesting things, whether it's opening a restaurant or taking a skill that they have and turning it into a small business, or serving the community through all types of missions and all types of ways that they give back. And so our podcast is exactly like our museum and heritage park, in that we want to inspire children and adults to see beyond, but we want people to hear the stories of the real people of our region, and apply that to their own lives and their own dreams. And, if these people can do it, maybe I can do it. We've had everybody from Blake, who is a phenomenal young man who loved smoking meats and decided to go to Texas, and he learned how you smoke brisket from some of the best brisket smokers in Texas, and he brought that back and had a food truck in Martin, Tennessee, and then has opened up a phenomenal restaurant called Blake's at Southern Milling in Martin. We've had a young lady recently who saw a row of buttercups along a fence row and said to herself, I like that. And so she plowed up her front yard, planted all types of flowers, put in an automatic system where people can come up and pay with credit card, and for $5 you can fill up as many flowers as you want in a mason jar. And so my whole family went. We did that recently, and so that's this huge success that came out of just a little idea. And so those are the kind of stories that we like to tell on our podcast. And I know your podcast is really great. It's a good podcast when you forget you're on a podcast.
There you go.
You're just listening to a person talk. A lot of times I'm just blown away by the fascinating things that these folks are doing. And I have friends in D.C. who say, hey, we listen to your podcast because we're fascinated by these stories of people that are doing interesting things. So it's applicable whether you live in a rural community or in a metropolitan community.
We're speaking with Scott Williams, president of Discovery Park of America. We'll be back after this important message.
Business Credit Report in Gallatin reminds us arts education is an essential part of a balanced education. It helps students develop creativity, critical thinking skills, and problem solving. This message has been made possible by Business Credit Report. For more information, visit them at businesscreditreports.com.
We're back with author and Discovery Park of America president Scott Williams. Well, I think the thing that struck me about the podcast is, I come from a newspaper background many, many decades ago, and I think that, these would have made really wonderful centerpiece feature stories on Sunday, or cover stories in a Monday magazine.
Yeah. So what was what were you a journalist?
Yes.
What did you work for?
You mean where did I work?
Yeah. Where did you work?
I wrote for a variety of places. Okay. I was went to graduate school in New York City for journalism, and worked in upstate New York in the at a paper called the Democrat and Chronicle. I worked at the Omaha World Herald at one time. Wrote for the Washington Post and for NPR. My specialty was I had a background in music and piano. So my specialty back in those old days, and this is not something that has translated into the 21st century as much, but I was a music critic.
Oh,
so I would go to like a Nashville symphony or a national symphony concert at the Kennedy Center, and at the end of it, I would run out of there, catch a cab, and race over to the Washington Post, and in 50 minutes have a 800-word editor-proof review for the morning's paper.
Weren't those the days?
Yeah, those are the days.
Young people will never know.
I couldn't. Like. First of all, I don't think I could run as fast out of the Kennedy Center anymore. But that was a different kind of world.
Well, just the whole culture of words on paper was, and I majored in journalism, but I took a different direction. But at the museum, obviously, I got to work with hundreds of talented journalists.
Oh yeah,
and so. Nobody really can appreciate the dedication to the craft of words on paper that print journalists have. So getting it AP style, getting it worded just right, working on it over and over and over again until it's perfect.
Oh, yeah.
That's lost, and I'm sad about that.
Well, even the papers that are left, there's something lost because during the pandemic, a lot of the journalists left their newsrooms and started working from home, because you can work from anywhere now, I suppose, supposedly. But most of what I learned, I went to graduate school at Columbia University in New York, but most of what I learned from, just great working journalists.
Right. And that's
many of whom didn't have degrees at all. They were just brilliant journalists.
Right. Well, at the museum, for example, we were a museum, but a lot of the folks were journalists. And so from the didactic panel to the press release to, every single thing that was a word on a piece of paper or on something on the wall was proofed and reproofed and discussed and analyzed, and there was such a joy in that for me. So I lament the fact that a lot of that is nowadays people are going to do a blog, or the other thing I hate about email is people can just fire off an email real fast and nobody is caring about what's happening to the future of words.
Oh, I know. Well, I had a journalism professor I know at Middle Tennessee State University tell me once that he had a young woman come up to him and say, well, I don't want to be a writer. I want to be a journalist. So I think that's maybe the world we're living in now. Well, speaking of words, you're the author of several books, and your books kind of remind me a little bit of Erik Larson, if anyone. I mean, you seem to enjoy finding some of these, overlooked nuggets of history and spinning out a nice narrative about them. And so I just like to maybe start out, because you're obviously there in West Tennessee. What inspired you to write about Davy Crockett, the king of the wild frontier?
Yeah, so I love biographies, and so I originally started researching ancestry kind of things because of my family and my connection to Tennessee. So that's what made me fall in love with Tennessee history. I'm right there where David Crockett was. It was probably silly to write a book on somebody that 1,000 other people have written books about, but I thought, let me look into this and see if there's any aspect of it that maybe nobody else has thought of. And so the more I read, the more I really kind of fell in love with the whole idea of the real David Crockett and the things that he did to create the myth,
right,
and to create this caricature of Davy Crockett that eventually gobbled up the real person.
And the real person, just for note, was not a Disney character. He was a politician.
He was a real dude,
and a charismatic one, and someone who really kind of created his own sort of oratory.
And just like everybody else, he had good points and bad points, and he made mistakes. And
Andrew Jackson hated him, right?
Oh yeah, right. And in a lot of ways, that's kind of what made me like David Crockett even more. Is he would stand up to if he thought something was right, he would stand up for it, but then at the same time, when he was supposed to be working in Washington on behalf of the people, he was actually in the East, in Philadelphia and New York and Boston, promoting his book that he had written. So, there's a fallibility there that you can also appreciate. He was the first celebrity, as far as I can find. He
like
was
a licensing celebrity,
He was right? He was the first celebrity.
I tend to think of Mark Twain that way, but yeah, Davy Crockett.
David Crockett. I mean, what David
preceded
Crockett,
him.
David Crockett had engravings done of an illustration of his face and signed it, and then had those engravings sold at retail, and so people could go in and buy their own David Crockett poster to hang up. And that was, as far as I can tell, the first person to actually do it that way, to where it was an endorsement.
And people were fascinated with him. And was it just this perception of the frontier? I know that this was after David Crockett's time, but you'd have, fairly prominent people like Frederick Law Olmsted, who was, the architect of Central Park. Before that, he was a New York Times correspondent. And he came to Tennessee, and for him, this was the West.
Right.
Back, and that was in the 1850s, I think.
Right. Well, at the time, so early, West Tennessee was Nashville. So this was considered West Tennessee because
right.
Because
no, and that's where he
was,
came.
Yeah.
And William Strickland, who built our Capitol building, he lost out on the contract to build the big Capitol in Washington. So there's a consolation prize. He came here.
Yeah.
But to me, it just seems wondrous that he didn't get a jet flight, to get down here. He had to go on horse and whatever else, and I guess do some fairly dangerous places.
Yeah. Well, right now I'm about 80% through with a book about Marcus Winchester, who founded Memphis. His father was James Winchester, big Nashville guy who was friends with John Overton and Andrew Jackson. And anyway, so I'm really deep into that era and into Tennessee, Nashville, and Memphis, and what was going on in West Tennessee. But so David Crockett, he was the representative for folks in the East who would never probably cross the Allegheny Mountains. And he was this person they could read about and say, oh, this guy represents all of that. And so he did to a degree, but not as much as he put forth. And a lot of what he put forth, he was trying to make a buck. And he never could. For his whole life, he spent more than he made. And so when he crossed the Mississippi River, never to come back, headed for the Alamo, that's when, after he died, when he actually did make money for his family. So he did finally make money, but it was after he was already gone.
Right. This is like a typical artist in that regard. Right. Well, the title of your book, I believe, is The Accidental Fame and Lack of Fortune of West Tennessee's David Crockett.
Right, and I got a lot of pushback for calling him West Tennessee's David Crockett, but the reason for that is I felt like East Tennessee had told the David Crockett story from their perspective.
Right.
This is West Tennessee's story about David Crockett and his relationship with the frontiers folks that were settling in West Tennessee.
Well, his prominence was really in the West.
Absolutely, yeah.
But he was an indentured servant working for his dad before that, right? When he was a young man.
Right. Well, and what's interesting about David Crockett is and this is very much a pat on the back to him. A lot of what you read today about David Crockett came from the pen of David Crockett and the people he paid to help write his autobiography, and he spun it exactly the way he wanted it to be spun. And so every single thing in his autobiography has to be seen through the lens of he was doing branding. He was doing self-branding. He was an influencer. And so he was writing this and having it written exactly the way he wanted it written. So when I did my book, I tried to follow up each of those things and find evidence and if I couldn't find, I would say, well, evidence can't be found. Here's what he said happened, and then to follow it up with that, the Whigs were sort of thinking he might be a good candidate for president. And so they too were spinning his story to the way they wanted it to be. So anyway, there was a lot of spin. So it's a political book, but it was also, a marketing, PR, and branding book as well, the one that I wrote, because I was looking at all of that. But anyway, I just found him to be a fascinating character of history that a lot of people don't know those parts of.
We know him as John Wayne or any of the characters, actors who played him. Well, there is obviously some real controversy about how he died. Was he captured and executed, or did he die, in pitched battle at the Alamo? We don't know. Will we ever know that for sure?
I mean, not until we get to heaven and can ask him. Okay. But right now, the perception that he died as a hero, holding his gun up and shot all of his bullets out and then used his gun as a bat, is probably not true. What is more likely to have happened is while the battle was raging, a group of Tennesseans and some other folks were kind of holding off to the back, and then came forward afterwards and said, "Hey, we're celebrities. We're not really supposed to be here." And they were executed anyway, but those are two very different stories that we will probably never know exactly what happened. But in any event, there were many opportunities for him to leave in the days leading up to, and it was very evident what was happening. So he chose to stay there and stick it out, and stay there till the end. It was a unfortunate and untimely way for him to end his life, but in a lot of ways, that's what triggered the Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier, that many people were introduced to decades and decades later through Walt Disney.
Yeah. Okay. We're speaking with Scott Williams, president of Discovery Park of America. We'll be back after this important message.
Business Credit Report encourages your students to get involved in both arts and athletics. Engaging in arts as well as physical activity elevates your mood and stimulates your brain. The ability to balance creative expression with teamwork and discipline is a valuable asset in today's multifaceted world. This message has been made possible by Business Credit Report in Gallatin. Visit them at businesscreditreports.com.
We're back with author and Discovery Park of America president Scott Williams. Well, you've written books about other celebrities of bygone eras. I just wanted to ask you just briefly, what attracted you to this gentleman named Odd McIntyre?
Yeah, I was, when I was doing a book on Richard Halliburton, who was a Memphis explorer. And
that's the other book, yeah.
Yeah, so I was writing a book about him, and I ran across in the research by Odd McIntyre, who just wrote hilariously. And so a lot of times when I am researching and I run across somebody that I want to read later personally for fun, I'll just go ahead and buy a bunch of their books and then put them on the bookshelf and then get to them later on. So I finished the book on Richard Halliburton and pulled down the Odd McIntyre book and started reading through it. And it really kind of made me laugh out loud, which doesn't happen a lot. And so I thought, who is this guy? And so I decided, I'm going to find out if there's a book there. I don't know. So I did a little bit of research in his life, and it seemed to keep me interested. So I went to Gallipolis, Ohio, where he was born and raised, and went to the university there. It's always a good place to start. It was the University of Rio Grande, not Rio, Rio Grande. And so I just went into the president's office and I asked, could I speak to the president? And I said, I'm just curious about Odd McIntyre, or is there materials that... She said, I've been waiting for somebody to come. She took me to an old house that was on campus. We went up some crickety stairs. She opened the door, and there was all of his letters and notes and photographs that his wife had donated to the university, and it had sat in there.
Just a bonanza for a writer, huh?
Oh my gosh, you have no idea. It's like the biggest rush that you can imagine. So just getting to go through all that, you really get to know these people, especially when you're looking at things people that hasn't been made public yet.
Well, his name was Oscar Odd McIntyre.
Yeah, Oscar Odd McIntyre. His name was really Odd McIntyre, and for anybody, I'm sure nobody knows who he is.
Well, he was a celebrity columnist, right?
He left Gallipolis, Ohio, as a young man with his wife. They went to 1920s New York, and he became the most read journalist
15
of his
million
day. Yeah, he
circulation
was
his syndicated column.
He would go to a club and talk to the celebrities. He would talk to everybody, and he wrote this really fun, entertaining column. But at the same time, he had a disease that he didn't talk about that we don't even really know a lot about still today. But he was progressively unable to write, and it appears as though his wife took over and continued to write the column, because it's how they lived. That's how they made their money, and they made a lot of money. Lived in a big fancy mansion and drove Rolls Royces and had little dogs and, dressed in the best clothes of the day. And the theory is, and what I propose probably happened in the book. I wasn't there, so if I can't prove it 100%, but he was unable to really move his body a lot or write. So she would go into the clubs, get the information, and then she would come back and they would write it together, and she would send it to the publisher. So he ended up dying pretty young, pretty early, and she moved back to Gallipolis, Ohio, where she lived in a big mansion and was a big part of the community for many, many, many years until she died. They had no children. She left everything to that university. And so, it's just really an interesting story. The people he knew and the things he did, to me, was just really cutting edge. And the way that he covered the entertainers was interesting.
Right. Well, in thinking about those two characters, Halliburton and McIntyre, it sort of just made me think a little bit about how fleeting certain kinds of fame can be. I mean, obviously with Davy Crockett, that's sort of an rural legend or frontier legend. That's a little different. But, these guys were really household names at one time.
Oh, absolutely.
Very, very well known. I mean, the most famous musician in the world when McIntyre would have been writing would, probably not have been George Gershwin, who I believe he would have written about. It was a Polish pianist named Paderewski, who would fill Madison Square Garden to play Chopin polonaises.
Right.
And, he's a footnote today. No one would hear him. I was just thinking, Taylor Swift announced that she's going to be wrapping up her Eras tour soon. And I was thinking in 2135 is the director of the Discovery Park of America, 100 years from now, going to be writing a book on the swift rise of a famous musician, who, 100 years from now, no one will know who that is.
Well, and the nice thing about all that you just said is that when you're researching all that, you really do realize how temporary all this is that we're living through right now, and how up in arms we are about everything happening, in our culture, in our music, in our politics, and 30 years from now, it'll be all new things, and a lot of this will barely be a footnote in history.
Yeah.
And so, we are a very strong people, and as Americans, we will move forward, and we'll have new politicians and new causes and new singers, and so it's really interesting when you realize how big some of these names were, and how some of these people were, and how relevant they were to daily lives back then, and how different things are. The transition, if you will, of journalism is another,
that's
case
huge.
in point. Whereas I spend I spend my newspapers.com account, they probably want to charge me much more because I'm on it constantly, looking at, because I love to go back to the original sources and really read what people were writing. And so it's just, 100 years ago, it's crazy how 100 years things have changed so dramatically in the way things are covered, the words that are used, the people's lives. And so, why does history matter? That's what a lot of people, are, one time I asked an aunt, I was doing a lot of ancestry research. She was 90 years old, and she says, why do you care about all this? Why does it matter? It's all in the past, and I think that's how we learn. That's how we put things into relevance, and that's how we figure them out.
Isn't that fascinating? Well, and that I guess maybe brings us back to wraps us around to our conclusion here in Discovery Park, which is all about history and discovery. I believe, do I understand you have a replica of the Gutenberg Press?
We do, there? Right, and a replica of the Liberty Bell.
Well, what was more revolutionary than the Gutenberg Press?
Absolutely.
When you think about it, I mean, all of a sudden, instead of having to rely on a Catholic monk somewhere to tell you what was in the Bible, you suddenly could read it yourself and start coming up with some of your own ideas. And within about 150 years of the invention of that, you start seeing newspapers cropping up in Germany and other European towns. Total revolution in the way people live.
And we are fortunate.
And we're maybe in that kind of a period now with the digital revolution.
Just going to say, we're fortunate that we can be part of. You and I are close to the same age. I'm probably a little older, but we were able to see the days when people used rub-on type, and we had to use typewriters. We had typewriter class in school, and then we saw the internet and the rise of music, digital music, and then journalism and what it did to that. And now we're right here where we're seeing AI, and we're seeing what AI is doing, to all that. Side note for anybody listening, I'm doing a lot. If there's anybody listening who loves research and has struggled with transcribing old letters, I have about 150 letters that the person I'm writing about, Marcus Winchester, hand wrote, which would be great research, except he had horrible handwriting.
Oh my God.
I've struggled with how can I translate. Finally, I gave up. And then one day I thought, why don't I try AI and see? It could translate at first about 30%, and the more I did it, it got better and better reading his handwriting. And now I can get about 80% of his letters transcribed in about 3 minutes, each one. And so it's a game changer for those of us that like to look at that old original documents, to see what people were writing, and to be able to translate that fast is just a miracle.
Wow. And in about 100 years, you can feed that all into some quantum computing system, and it'll turn him into a hologram, and he'll actually tell you what he was writing.
So we can find out what David Crockett would do.
Yeah, what happened. Yeah, all that stuff.
Maybe he could run for president.
Yeah. Well, one last question. Discovery Park is not too far from here in Middle Tennessee.
That's right.
So I encourage everyone to go out and visit. And what do you hope when they visit? What do you hope they discover?
It's going to be different for everybody. So whether you're a college professor who knows just about everything, or you've got a 5-year-old child or grandchild, everybody's going to discover something. They're going to trigger something in their mind that's going to make them go back and want to research more. So whether it's sports or art or theater or science or transportation or printing, they're going to experience something that they didn't know. And that's the beauty of Robert Kirkland's vision, is that it's a little bit of everything so that every single person will find something that could absolutely change their life. And it's only 3 hours from Nashville.
Wonderful. Okay, well, Scott Williams, president of Discovery Park of America, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to MACC Talk from Mont Haven Arts and Cultural Center. Our mission is to educate, elevate, and encourage our community through the transformative power of the arts. If you're interested in transforming your creative life, check out our website at monthavenarts.org. Our guest today was Scott Williams, president of Discovery Park of America. Our podcast music was written by Nashville composer Christina Spinay. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.